Hello, horror enthusiasts. Welcome back to Quick Scare, your haven for spine-tingling narratives. Tonight, we explore tales that defy explanation. Grab a blanket, lock the doors, and prepare for an adrenaline-pumping quick scare. I need to get something off my chest that's been haunting me since a near-death experience I had a few years ago. I never really talked about it much, but the memories have been clawing at the edges of my consciousness, demanding to be shared. So sit tight, because this is a wild ride. About 3 years ago, I got into a horrific car accident. It was one of those life-altering moments that you never see coming. I won't bore you with the details, but suffice it to say, my body was broken, and the light at the end of the tunnel seemed so far away. I was declared dead at the scene. Now here's where things take a bizarre turn. In the moments after my heart stopped beating instead of floating towards the proverbial light, I found myself in a vast, pitch-black void. No angels, no pearly gates, just nothingness. It was disorienting, to say the least. I couldn't feel my body, but I was aware of my existence. As I drifted through this void, an indescribable fear settled over me. Imagine the feeling of being watched, but multiply it by 1,000. It was as if the darkness itself had eyes, and they were fixated on me. I tried to scream, but there was no sound, no air, just an overwhelming silence that rang in my ears. Then, I began to hear whispers. Unintelligible at first, but gradually they morphed into words. Distorted voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand. The more I strained to comprehend, the louder and more frantic they became. It felt like 1,000 souls crying out in despair. Suddenly, a blinding light pierced the darkness, and I was yanked back into consciousness. I was alive, back in my broken body on the cold, hard pavement. Paramedics surrounded me, bewildered expressions on their faces. They said they lost me for a few minutes, but here I was, breathing again. The days that followed were a blur of hospital beds and medical procedures, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. I started having vivid dreams, or nightmares, I should say, of that black void. The whispers echoed in my mind, and the feeling of being watched persisted. I became obsessed with trying to make sense of what happened to me. Desperation led me to seek out others who had experienced something similar. I joined online forums, scoured medical journals, and even consulted with experts in near-death experiences. What I discovered was chilling. There were others like me, people who had glimpsed the void and heard the whispers. We formed a small community, sharing our stories and trying to piece together the puzzle of our after-death experiences. Many were haunted by the fear that whatever watched us in the void had somehow followed us back. As the months passed, our group grew, and the whispers in my mind became louder. We speculated about the nature of the void, whether it was a realm between life and death or something more sinister. Some believed it was a collective consciousness of the deceased, while others thought it was a malevolent force feeding off our fear. Then, one day, a member of our group disappeared without a trace. No online activity, no responses to messages. It was as if they had been erased from existence. The whispers in my mind reached a fever pitch, and a sense of impending doom settled over our community. Desperation led us to conduct a risky experiment. We gathered in a virtual meeting, each of us recounting our experiences with the void. As we shared our stories, the whispers intensified, merging into a cacophony of voices that reverberated through our collective consciousness. Suddenly, the darkness returned. We found ourselves together in the void, no longer alone. The fear was palpable as we clung to each other, trying to make sense of our surroundings. The whispers coalesced into words, a chilling revelation that sent shivers down our spines. We are not the dead. We are the forgotten. The void began to unravel, revealing fragments of memories, moments from our lives that had been erased. We were not survivors of near-death experiences. We were survivors of something far more insidious, a manipulation of reality itself. As the void dissolved, we were thrust back into our lives, forever changed. The whispers ceased, and the fear lifted, but the weight of our newfound knowledge lingered. We were the remnants of a reality that had been altered, and we had stumbled upon the truth hidden behind the veil of existence. So, here I am, sharing this story with you all. I can't shake the feeling that we were meant to remember, meant to break free from the forgotten. But with that knowledge comes a price, the constant awareness that our reality is fragile and the whispers of the void may return at any moment. I've decided it's time to get it off my chest. What happened to me defies explanation, and it still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. So, buckle up, because this is a wild ride. It all started about 6 months ago when I got into a pretty bad car accident. My memory of the event is fragmented, but the flashes I do recall are vivid. I remember the screeching tires, the blinding headlights, and the sickening crunch of metal against metal. The next thing I knew, everything went dark. The sensation that followed was eerie. I was weightless, floating in absolute nothingness. No pain, no fear, just a void. But then, gradually, I became aware of a distant light. It wasn't the comforting glow often described in near-death experiences. It was harsh, almost clinical. As I moved toward it, the light grew brighter, and that's when things took a turn for the bizarre. I found myself in what seemed like a sterile, featureless room. The walls were a cold shade of gray, and the air felt thick and oppressive. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. Figures, almost shadow-like, stood around me. Their forms were indistinct, and they seemed to be observing me with a detached curiosity. No eyes, no mouths, just a palpable sense of presence. One of these entities approached me. Its form flickered, making it impossible to discern any features. A voice, emotionless and mechanical, echoed in my mind saying, "You are not meant to be here. Return." Without warning, I was engulfed in blinding light, and the next thing I knew, I was back in my mangled car, surrounded by the chaos of the accident scene. Paramedics were rushing towards me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and confusion. As you can imagine, I was rattled to the core. The experience haunted my thoughts day and night. I became obsessed with understanding what had happened, convinced that there was more to it than a simple near-death experience. Things took a chilling turn when I started noticing subtle changes in my surroundings. Shadows seemed to linger longer, and the air felt charged with an unsettling energy. I began catching glimpses of those shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. The feeling of being watched became a constant companion. One night, unable to shake the feeling of unease, I decided to research near-death experiences. What I found sent shivers down my spine. Many people described encounters with mysterious entities after their return, entities that seemed to follow them back from the other side. That's when the true horror of my situation hit me. Those shadowy figures weren't a figment of my imagination. They were real, and they had followed me back from whatever place I had briefly visited. Desperation set in as I tried to find a way to rid myself of these entities. I consulted experts, delved into obscure spiritual practices, and even considered seeking out mediums. But every attempt seemed to make things worse. The shadows grew more persistent, their presence more palpable. Then, just when I thought I was reaching the breaking point, the unexpected happened. I received a message from a researcher who had stumbled upon my story online. She claimed to have knowledge of a phenomenon where individuals inadvertently brought something back with them from the other side. As we corresponded, she revealed that the entities I encountered were not benign observers, but rather malevolent beings feeding off the energy of the living. They thrived on fear and despair, and my heightened emotional state only made me more susceptible to their influence. In a twist that sent chills down my spine, the researcher informed me of a way to sever their connection. The key, she said, was to confront them with unwavering courage and deny them the fear they craved. It sounded easier said than done, but I was willing to try anything. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I faced the shadows head-on. The first encounters were terrifying, as the entities intensified their efforts to instill fear. But gradually, I found strength in defiance. I refused to be a pawn in their sinister game. As I stood my ground, something remarkable happened. The entities began to dissipate, their forms becoming less defined until they vanished entirely. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the shadows that once haunted my every step were gone. Now, as I share this with you, I can't help but wonder how many others out there might be grappling with the aftermath of a near-death experience. Beware the shadows that lurk in the periphery, and if you ever find yourself facing entities from beyond the veil, remember, courage may be your only defense against the unknown that follows you back. Lights on, brave souls. If our tales kept you up, show some love with a like, share your own nightmares, and hit subscribe for a weekly date with fear. Until next time, sweet dreams or not.